Vickers, I thought I was only going to see you in like 2.5 months over the show season. Like we typically, bump into each other and say hello and catch up on all things that's happening. But I'll let you introduce yourself here shortly. But you dropped a bomb on the world, essentially. You realize that, right?
Yeah, yeah. We every year we see each other at the shows, and remember, um, I think for the past 2 years, I was telling you that we're busy with this litigation, and that someday we're going to get there. But the legal process in South Africa is quite slow, and it takes long. Yeah. So eventually we got there, and on Friday we got that decision from the court. So yeah,
That was just
all good.
unbelievable. Like you couldn't, in our world, you couldn't move a step without hearing about it. So, Vickers Diedrichs, welcome to the Origins Foundation podcast. We wanted to do this like right on the hot of the heels of the decision, the court decision. We'll get into that all over this podcast. But before we go any further, why don't you introduce yourself, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Vickers Diedrichs. I'm the owner of Rockwood Conservation. It's a 33,000 acre reserve in the Northern Cape of South Africa. And it's basically dedicated to rhino conservation. We've got more than 430 rhinos there, white rhino. And yeah, that's what we do. So
So,
we
Vickers, one of
also
the
hunt.
things, just so that everyone knows, I think early on I was listening to a program about you, and I was like, well, 400 rhinos, that's pretty sort of astounding, right, in terms of numbers. But I think the most like astounding number that I've heard is you got like 40 of the rhinos out of Kruger originally, right?
Yeah, 45.
And how many? So, and Kruger right now has like an 80% loss of rhino. Okay,
Yeah.
this is setting up the
So
scene here. This is setting up the scene here because you got 45 rhino from Kruger, and if you were operating under the Kruger model, there's 8 rhino left.
yes.
And how many do you have from the 45?
From that 45, over 150 now. So actually that score, like you say, is 150 versus 9. If you take roughly 80% of them would have been dead by now. So that goes to show the difference between what's happening on private reserves and state reserves. Now, I mean, obviously, to safeguard a place like Kruger is almost impossible. We've
Agreed.
got
Agreed.
our army in there. We've got a lot of people doing a lot of hard work, but it's just virtually impossible. And then on top of that, you've got corruption and all the things that goes with that. And that's just why it's so important, that private reserves get a way to fund rhino conservation, because now roughly 70% or more of rhinos in South Africa is on private reserves. Now previously, say 10, 15 years ago, it was the other way around, and the majority, say 70% plus, was on state reserves. And obviously, then funding is not such an issue because there's money from treasury, there's income from tourism, a lot of donor funding, etc., etc. But private reserves doesn't get that funding. We get no subsidies, nothing, zero. So we have to make it work in a sustainable manner. In a capitalistic world, I must almost say.
Of course.
And yeah, and so when I set out, I never had a plan to have so many rhinos.
Yeah, why did
I
you, like, what was the whole deal here? Because nobody
yeah,
goes
so
out and says, oh, I've got this dream of having 400 rhino, right?
yeah, no, so I farmed there with cattle, And I thought, cattle farming in that area is very marginal. So why not, rewild the place and turn it into a game reserve?
Vickers,
And
has this farm been in your family a while, or is this something that you bought, or?
yeah, no, it's something that I bought in around 2007.
Okay.
So and roughly to 2012, I decided, let's rewild the place. And I just wanted a game reserve for me and my friends and family, and we love the outdoors and to hunt, and so I never had any commercial dreams about the place. And then in 2013 got the first rhino from Kruger, and then also a few from Umfolozi and Sihluwe National Parks in Natal.
And
And
can you just explain that process? Like when you get a rhino, what are you doing there, Vickers? Are you going on auction? Are you buying a rhino off auction? Are these government parks saying we've got too many, we're putting them up on auction? Are we giving them away? What's the situation there?
yes, that was back then. Remember, Kruger had more than 10,000 rhinos around 2010, and that was more than enough for the park, and they put rhinos on auction every year. I think they sold roughly 100, 150 per year, back then. Now, obviously, they cannot. But yeah, so
And Sihluwe and Flows did the same thing.
same thing. They had yearly auctions where they sold rhinos, and that's where I bought them. And then in 2015, I had the first poaching, and it was a rude awakening. And I
Talk
thought,
to me
wow,
about that. Talk to me about that 2015 poaching. Up until that point, had you been implementing anti-poaching, anti-poaching security measures, or were you oblivious to it? Like, it's never going to hit me. I'm way in the bush. Nobody's going to find me.
yeah. Well, to start off with, the Northern Cape is a very safe area, and there wasn't any poaching before 2014 in the Northern Cape. And so, yeah, I had rangers, but not in the intensive manner that we're doing it now. And then, we had the first poaching and another one in 2015. And around that time, roughly more than 1,000 rhinos were killed every year in South Africa. And I realized, shit, if I want to keep my rhinos safe, I have to do something extraordinary. And that's when I started to create intensive protection zones, where I basically keep most of my rhinos, and it's been very successful. Then around 2018, a friend of mine had a problem with rhinos that he couldn't look after more, because of poaching, etc., etc., and I took them on, and yeah, but I'd say I can't remember the precise numbers now, but roughly almost 300 calves were born there at Rockwood.
Wow.
So yeah, but now the dilemma, back when I bought the rhino in 2013-14, we paid roughly about 750,000 rands for a cow.
Okay.
But with poaching, the prices dropped to around, say, 100,000, 120, maybe 150,000 if you're lucky.
Just because of liability concerns and security concerns, rhino just had no value anymore?
Absolutely. So you can imagine, your whole investment is at risk if somebody comes and kill it. And the security concerns, now all of a sudden there's people, dangerous people with guns walking around on your farm, that wouldn't blink an eye to kill anybody that confronts them. So people just got rid of their rhino. And a lot of them were poached. And so the number of rhino owners dropped from, I'm not sure about the statistics, but close to 500 down to probably just under 200 now.
Wow.
and just because nobody wants rhino. So my dilemma was, it cost me around, say, 450 to 500,000 rand to raise a rhino to, say, about 5 years old, and you got only about a quarter of that. So it didn't make sense for me
If you were going to sell
to sell them. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know. That wasn't the situation when I started out, and I realized the only way to make rhino conservation sustainable is, through the selling of horn, and I set out probably 2016, 2017, started the fight and investigating how it would be possible.
Yeah. Well, Vickers, obviously, this whole situation that we're going to sort of explore here is not new, right? There's somebody who's come before you, a guy called John Hume, who has tried this, but I think he did things a lot differently than you. He was almost set up, I'm not very familiar with John Hume's setup, but it almost looked agricultural, right? It was like, I've got these feedlots, I'm just growing more and more and more and more rhino. You're operating very differently than John Hume, right?
Yeah, so to start out, I've got a lot of respect for John. He's a good friend of mine, and we talk often. Unfortunately, the guy ran out of time. He's in his 80s, and he was fighting this 10 years before me, and it was never his dream to have 2,000 rhinos. I promise you. But the same dilemma. What do you do with them? And you always have that hope that someday you're gonna win this fight. And then places like Buffalo Dream Ranch, where John had his rhino, and Rockwood would be safety nets, for repopulating areas where rhinos have gone extinct. So yeah, his approach was different. I had to obviously, find a way to finance this, and that's why I started hunting, eventually also hunting of rhinos, and that's where we met with
Right.
going to the hunting conventions, etc.
Yep.
I think that's basically the only difference. I have obviously bigger land, but yeah, eventually.
You also got a different model of how you bring your rhinos, you sort of corral your rhinos, don't you, at night to sort of create what did you call them?
Bomas.
Intensive protection zones?
Yes. So eventually, the cost of protecting rhinos is not a function of the number of rhinos you protect. It's the function of the area you protect. So if you have a relatively smaller area with a bigger number of rhinos, then obviously it's more cost effective and more effective. So that's also what John did. And unfortunately, people that wasn't there got the idea that it's very agricultural, but desperate times calls for desperate measures.
Sure. Sure.
And Kruger is a good example of that. It's all very nice to see rhinos roaming around on big wild areas, but they're getting killed. And that's the reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's maybe let me start the whole idea behind the legal court case. Well, let's just start there. You decided, hey, we need to do something. You're being stymied. Explain to me why you're being stymied. Those people who have no idea about rhino conservation right now, why are you in such a bind that forced you to start this legal proceedings?
Okay, so I think let's take a few steps back. So the only way to trade or let's rather say, CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Wild Fauna and Flora, governs the trade between countries. And most of the world are signatories to that convention. Now, basically, for any species, Appendix 1 or Appendix 2 species, to be traded internationally, that species must be downlisted. So in other words, rhino,
or you get a permit, or you get a permit,
all right? But the permit is just part of the process. But the principle. Right. So if you've got, say, rhino, they're Appendix 2, but the horn is Appendix 1. So there are certain strict rules pertaining to rhino horn to trade it, and up till now, that strict rules haven't allowed us to trade. Okay, so basically we had to go to CITES to ask them, listen, we want to trade. Please downlist it from Appendix 1 to 2, and then the rules would be more relaxed, and then we would have been able to trade. But to get that decision, you must convince 2/3 of the countries there to vote in your favor.
And these countries don't just vote individually; they vote in blocks, like the whole European bloc votes. And there's a significant anti-use, it's a huge political lobbying system in which people that don't have rhinos, like Europe, like Western Africa, the Western African bloc, get influenced by different groups like a Humane Society or PETA or whatnot to say, hey, vote no to downlisting.
Yeah. So they and I realized there's no way I'm gonna from where I'm sitting gonna have an influence on those countries, and it's virtually impossible. So then I looked at CITES and thought, what other ways are there? So there's certain exemptions, and I must stress it. It's part of the convention. It's Article 7. It's right in the beginning there. And those exemptions were allowed to facilitate trade, and the whole idea was to protect animals in the wild. So in the heading of CITES, it tells you it's there for wild fauna and flora. So one of the things is what they call the captive breeding exemption, and there's basically two types. The one is for commercial purposes, and that would be typically something like a crocodile farm, where crocodiles are bred in captivity, they slaughtered and the skins are sold. Endangered crocodiles, even things like sturgeon fish, for caviar. And like I say, the idea was then there's a market for that product. People want them, but they get them from the wild, and that's putting pressure on the wild animals. They're being poached, or legally, illegally, doesn't matter. And so the one is for commercial purposes, and the other one is basically for conservation purposes. And that's what I was doing, and I realized, this is exactly what I'm doing. I would qualify for this exemption, and I would be able to export under this exemption. And then we applied for permits, but government didn't allow it, and then we decided
you saw this route. You saw this route of the exemption. You're like, hey, and I'm assuming the government is DFFE in South Africa, right? And you said, hey, DFFE, here's the exemption that I'm looking at. I believe I qualify under this. I would like an export permit for rhino horn under this exemption. And government said, no, you're not getting one.
Exactly. So it's not new. So that
Did
exemption.
John Hume try this? Did he go this route?
No, he didn't. Unfortunately, like I say, age caught up with the guy. He just ran out of time, and he had so many um, how can I say, opposition to what he was doing. He lived under continuous stress, just financing the project, etc., etc.
The project was very controversial. It was not.
Yeah,
It didn't need to be, but it was.
Yes. Yeah. So, but also, it was not like, you pick up CITES and you realize, bang, this is the way. I mean, we did a lot of research, we talked to a lot of people, and until we realized, that path is the way to go. And then obviously, people in DFFE resisted, because I don't know, for some reason, rhinos are treated different to any other species. That exemption or any specimen exported under that exemption is code C. On a CITES permit, there's a source code, and if it comes from the wild, it's code W. But when it comes from a conservation breeding facility, it's code C. Now, code C is widely used by all countries, and in fact, millions of specimens are exported between countries under code C every year. South Africa has used it more than 26 million times. So it's not new, and you can think of all sorts of animals, parrots, chimpanzees, tigers, name it, are all exported under code C. And but for some reason, government wouldn't allow us to use code C or that conservation breeding exemption. And so we applied for permits, and they refused it. And then we went to court and to ask the court to review that decision. So long story short,
and that was 2 years
on Friday.
Yes. 2 years ago, you got the response from government 2 years ago. No, you're not allowed to do this.
Yes.
And so you decided, let me talk to some lawyers, and let's put this process in place and start the proceedings to see whether or not we could get a court adjudication on whether we're right or the government's right.
Yeah. We basically started talking to the legal team way before we actually even applied for permits, because we knew what was going to happen. So we got our ducks in a row so that when they eventually refused it, we had the plan. We knew exactly what the game plan is, what we should do, what the argument should be, etc.
So talk to me. So obviously we're here, we're talking. It is Saturday morning. The decision came out on Friday. Talk to me exactly the decision that came down.
All right. So in refusing our permits, the MEC, that's the basically the highest authority in the Northern Cape province, and nature conservation is a provincial function. So she is the issuing authority of the Northern Cape. All right. So she refused the permit, and she basically said that we should have an import permit that we didn't have, which we then said in court we don't need anyway. Basically this came from the wild, although we were registered as a conservation breeding facility, and that there wasn't a non-detrimental finding to say that trade in rhino horn would not be detrimental for for rhinos. So basically, the court then, everything was presented, and the court adjudicated that, Article 7, Paragraph 5, that specific one, that specific exemption of CITES does apply in South Africa. It's part of our domestic law, and that the MEC must go back and retake a decision, but now taking into consideration that that is part of our law and that we don't need an import permit, that we don't need an NDF, and basically that opened trade from conservation breeding facilities.
And that's what the C mark on CITES stipulates, right? So you can get you get an exemption. That means the import country doesn't require a permit, because that was a little bit confusing to me. You satisfied your side of the game through the C exemption, i.e. I don't need an export permit, but there's also two other things that are very important. One, the country that's bringing it in doesn't need an import permit, and two, it doesn't need an NDF, which is the non-detrimental findings, which is really huge when it comes to, like, an NDF is really required when somebody says, okay, look, we want to take from the wild lion, elephant, rhino, leopard, and when we take from the wild, here is a study, here is an analysis that says there is no detriment, i.e. a non-detrimental finding, there's no detriment to that population in the wild because of what we're doing. Actually, because there's also a little bit of enhancement in that, right? We're actually enhancing that population because of what we do. From the schooling, from the anti-poaching, from the medical, from all the things that come as a result of hunting.
Yeah, no, exactly. So not to get too technical, but
no,
if you
want you to
to
get technical, let's go. Come on.
Yeah, so normally if you want to export a CITES 1 listed specimen, you need an import permit from the receiving country.
So let's talk
first.
through this. Somebody hunted a rhino in South Africa.
All right. No, a rhino. That's the other weird thing. So a live rhino, is Appendix 2. Okay. If you hunt that rhino, it's Appendix 2. Okay. But the dead specimen, the horn, is Appendix 1. So the horn has got a higher conservation value than the live rhino. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, so now what you just put together really, I use constantly in rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
And you're literally blowing my mind, and I love it when that happens. I've always said a dead rhino is 1,000 times more valuable than a live rhino. And I've used it in the context of the fact that the horn is so valuable, right? When you go down it to the kilogram number and you use whatever the black market price right now is, $30,000 to $60,000 a kilo, multiply it by multiple kilos to the cost of hunting a rhino, it's like this, right? It's 1,000 times more or 100 times more. But actually, legally, it is, because of the way that it's set up on Appendix 1 and Appendix 2.
Exactly. It's almost designed to not give rhinos a chance.
And here's the other thing. The CITES situation, Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, I don't know do we know if live rhinos were put on Appendix 2 50 years ago? Or did they come down?
No, so basically all rhinos were on Appendix 1. But then...
rhino horn trade has been banned since 1976, 1977. So 50 years we've been in this situation.
No, so the word ban doesn't exist in CITES. In the convention, you can scroll through the convention, you can do a search. There's no word... The word ban is never used. Okay, there's just certain strict rules,
restrictions on trade.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
So rhinos, basically all rhinos were on Appendix 1 or is on Appendix 1. But then I think it was in the late 80s or 90s, South Africa went there and said, listen, our white rhino population is stable and growing. Um, can we hunt them? And therefore, if we hunt them, the live, if we hunt them and if we export live animals, let that be Appendix 2. Okay, so that's why we can hunt rhinos, and you don't need that import permit first and then the export permit type of thing, and it's still very regulated, but basically you just need the export permit, and then after that, obviously the country that receives it do the import permit. Um, but yeah.
Okay. Okay, that makes complete sense. Man,
Mhm.
I love it. So let's how let me ask this. I'm just a little, if the country doesn't require an import permit now, in the scenario that has transpired in the last 24 hours, how does a country prove that horn didn't come illegally, Vickers?
All right, so I think it's important to stand still there. It's not a look. Most trades happen with an import permit and an export permit. Okay, but the sequence in how it takes place is where it gets tricky. So for Appendix 1, the importing country must first give the import permit. Okay, and there's certain things that they must do before they give that import permit. All right. Then with that import permit in hand, you go to the exporting country's management authority and you say, okay, I want an export permit. I've got an import permit already. Okay,
Yeah, that
but
makes
now,
complete sense. We're doing the same. We're doing that exact process for cheetahs right now. We have to get our import permits from Mozambique, get all that
first,
squared away before
yeah,
we come to South Africa DFFE and say, hey, we want an export permit.
exactly. So, but when it comes to Appendix 2 species, then it's just the opposite. So you can have the export permit first, and then you go to the importing country and you apply for an import permit. Okay, and there's also certain rules, etc. But it's much easier. Now you can imagine dealing with China. They are very sensitive when it comes to their image in the world, and so they will never give an import permit first. They burnt their fingers too many times. So that's just one thing that they won't do. Okay, but now this decision allows us to get the export permit. But with that export permit in hand, now obviously, the song is playing. It's easy for them to get up and dance with us. Yeah, to put it like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For somebody who's listening to this and going, I don't really understand the big deal. Is Vickers now planning on killing like half of his rhinos? Explain the situation of trimming of rhino horns and stuff like that.
Yeah. So rhino horn is basically keratin. It's like your nails and hair. It constantly grows. It's got no nerves. It's got no blood supply. It's dead tissue. And they, wear it down, work it down against trees and rocks, and they fight with it, and it breaks. So it just constantly grows. So you can trim it, and we do trim it, obviously to mitigate the risk of poaching, but also to keep them from killing each other. Rhinos don't really have other predators. The most rhino deaths happen because of killing between rhinos. So if you cut the rhino, the rhino horn, it's almost like boxers wearing gloves. When they fight, it's not that fatal. So we cut or trim the horns anyway. And we're sitting on stockpiles of that horn that was humanely trimmed. And like I say, it's dead tissue. The rhino doesn't even feel it. We dart the rhino. It's unconscious. and then we basically trim it off with a specific type of saw, and afterwards we wake the rhino up, and it's literally there on the top of his nose, and I doubt if he can even see there.
Vickers,
Yeah.
explain the. We just briefly touched on obviously liability and security associated with rhinos, and that being sort of the driver right now of, undervaluing rhinos, people not wanting to have rhinos, why the poaching is so hectic around rhinos. Go through for me, if you can, in detail of the security that you have in place, and so that people get an understanding of like the intensity of the security.
Yeah, so like I say, we've got intensive protection zones where we keep our most valuable assets, and that's basically the cows and calves. And there, the principle is almost like, say you've got sheep,
You corral
and
them
you've
up
got
every time, every
and
night.
you've got wolves preying on them. What would you do? You bring them into a safe place overnight, and during the day you open them up, and they go outside with a shepherd looking over them, and that's in principle basically what we're doing. So we've got about 20 rangers that operate on horseback,
Full
and
time,
then obviously
full time, right?
yeah, full time.
And they're armed to the gills.
Exactly. And obviously a lot of technology, thermal cameras, access control, fences. We make use of license plate recognition cameras on all the roads.
Yeah, explain that. Explain the license recognition cameras, because that's a pretty new technology that everybody's using, right? So you're connected into this huge network across the country.
Yes. So basically what happens, a car drives through one of those cameras. The camera reads the license plate. It's thrown against a database. And if it's a listed vehicle for some reason, stolen car, or known poacher or something, then obviously we notify it. But then we're also part of a bigger, let's call it intelligence grouping, because police in South Africa, dare I say, is pretty useless. So we have to do all the investigations, and we have to be proactive. So we've got a team of guys that is constantly working on identifying poachers and following networks. And you must realize poaching is organized crime. It's just a different commodity, but it's the same people that smuggle drugs, that deals in cash and transit heists in South Africa, smuggling of guns, etc., etc. It's just a different commodity. So we're really up against bad guys. It's not just petty criminals. It's really
Huge
bad
crime
guys.
syndicates.
Yes.
Have you had any poaching since the 2015 incident?
No. So fortunately, for the last 10 years, we've gone without poaching.
And in those last 10 years, there's been rampant poaching in South Africa.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they've started leaving, areas like Kruger where they've decimated the populations and headed down to Shishlui and Flows where the asset is still there. And, I think somebody couched it in a way that we're not seeing as much poaching pressure occur in Kruger because they can't find the rhinos anymore. And it's not easy anymore.
Yeah, if you look at the numbers, it looks like the numbers are coming down. But if you look at the percentage of rhinos being poached, there's not a difference, And if you look at the reports that they bring out every year, you can see there's a decline in the numbers year on year on year. And nothing has been done so far to change that trajectory. And in my opinion, the only way to stop it is to have a legal conduit, a legal way for people in the East to access horns. Because the rhino horn is mainly used in traditional Chinese medicine, and it's a custom or a culture.
Symbol. It's also super.
Well,
status symbol,
that was something that developed later on. You know, so initially it was only used in traditional Chinese medicine. But because there's no legal supply, the prices went up, from, I think it was something like $1 per kilo back in the 60s, you know, not a lot, but because there's no legal supply, the prices went up and up and up and up, and some people even, bought it as an investment because they speculate that rhinos are going extinct, and the prices just went up and up and up, and currently it's sitting probably in China, depending obviously on the horn and the size, etc., around $25,000 per kilo. And now it's a status symbol, because now if you've got a piece of rhino horn art that you can display on your desk or something, it's a show of wealth.
It's like having a Rolex or a Ferrari or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But it all started out in traditional Chinese medicine. And it's literally a thousands of year old tradition. So the demand is there. And yeah, I believe demand reduction, education might help. But in South Africa, for instance, we can't even teach our children in schools to read and write. What about trying to convince 1 billion Chinese not to follow a 1,000-year-old custom? It's not going to happen. So I believe once there's a legal way of getting the horn there, that prices will come down, and because prices come down, it won't be as worthwhile for the poaching syndicates. And plus now the people that is protecting the rhinos got the money in their hand to do it, and it's not in the hands of poachers anymore.
Yeah, because the other side that are opposed to what you're doing will say this is just going to muddle and increase the illegal take of wild rhinos, because now there's not going to be a way to distinguish between illegally taken poached rhinos and your commercially conservation bred rhinos. What would you say to somebody like that?
Well, it's quite the opposite. A rhino horn carries DNA, okay? And so all the rhinos at Rockwood and all the rhino horn that we trim is DNA tested, and it's got a DNA certificate. All right. So, and in fact, we've got a what we call a RODIS system in South Africa, where it's by law you're required to have all the rhinos in South Africa DNA tested and on file. So if they get a horn somewhere, doesn't matter where in the world, they can basically link it back to a specific rhino. Okay, so we're not saying it's a free for all. Now we're just buying and selling, and no. So we want that traceability. We want to have better enforcement. Just by the way, more than half of everything that's sold in China as rhino horn is actually not rhino horn. It's other types of horn, buffalo horn, all sorts of things. So now at least, we can give that consumer also the comfort to know that, this is real rhino horn. This is legal, humanely taken or produced rhino horn. And so we can bring that traceability in it. So it's going to be good for the consumer, and we can, I think, with the right marketing campaigns, get more and more consumers to buy the legal stuff, because they know it's the real stuff. Instead of the stuff you buy around the corner that you don't know if it's the real stuff or not. So I think it's just the opposite. It's not going to open the floodgates for more horn to go into China.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. So let's just go through again what the court ruled on Friday. So the court ruled, I'm just going to read from your press release.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, the CITES exemption for conservation bred rhinos is part of South African law. We've talked about that. That's the C component of the permit. Happens for lots and lots and lots of different species already in South Africa. You're not setting a new bar. It happens already. They issue export permits around that C component already. Export permits must be issued for horn from conservation breeding facilities. That's what you were challenging, because the MEC before, or TFFE, said, nope, we're not giving you an export permit. So because of that fact, you've now switched it, like we talked about earlier. The country that's receiving the rhino horn doesn't need to put the import permit in place first. It can be the other way around.
Yeah.
You've got the export permit. Now you can go to them and say, would you like to import this? And the last thing is that the MEC must decide on issuing a certificate within 7 days. I don't know if you want to get into like what happens next, Wikus. I obviously want to be very cognizant of legal proceedings and a court.
Yeah.
So you tell me.
So basically, that permits we applied for right in the beginning that they refused. Those permits must now be re-evaluated, and within 7 days they must come back to us, either approve it or give reasons why not. So generally they've got 20 days to decide on any permit. All right, but for this specific one's 7 days. Now they can come back and appeal it, and we waiting to see obviously what's going to happen. But if you read through this judgment, it's going to be hard to appeal it. Obviously there must be some aspect of it that they must try and appeal. But the way this judgment is written, it's going to be hard. So we'll see. They're probably going to appeal just to delay the process. We don't know. But yeah, at least it's another step closer to victory for us, and getting legal trade going and saving the rhino.
Well, Wikus, it certainly, from a timeliness perspective, couldn't have been better timed, given that we are 2.5 weeks away from CITES and its COP in Uzbekistan, in which there will certainly be, knowing the other side, probably celebrations around the 50-year anniversary of, let me make sure that my rhetoric is correct this time, 50-year celebrations around rhino horn restrictions that were put in place in the mid-70s to protecting rhinos. And I think we all can see that in 50 years, if you look at where we are today with rhinos, have they done better or worse as a result of the restrictions being put in place by CITES? It doesn't take a lot of scrutiny to understand that they are not doing better.
Yeah. If you look how many thousands of rhinos were poached in that 50 years, how the numbers of black rhinos came down from probably close to 100,000, down to a couple of thousand, maybe 3, 4, 5,000 now. How white rhino numbers at first increased, and then came down. Then there's the Asian rhinos. It's a totally different story. But all rhinos are suffering, and so the call it trade ban is not really helping. That's it's like trying to use a screwdriver to fix a bolt. It's you might have a tool, but it's not the right tool. It's not working, and doing the same thing all over and over is not going to get a different result.
Yeah, it sounds like the definition of insanity, right? In that you do the same thing and expect a different result.
Yeah, and unfortunately, if you take the value of the illegal trade in rhino horn, it's worth, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars. You know, if you take around, say, 1,000 sets of horns leaves Africa every year, you know, on average, say about 5 kilos, you know, conservatively. That's 5,000 kilos times $25,000 per kilo. You know, that's a lot of zeros. It's you know, over $100 million. So that's a lot of money to convince people to not create opposition, you know, illegal trade against that. You know, there's a lot of money involved, and then there's also a lot of people, as you know, collecting money for saving the rhino, and most of that money never gets to grassroots level. You know, it's an industry, and think about it. How does the model works? You know, they get money to solve a crisis. They go to donors. There's this crisis. You know, please save the rhino. But if they eventually save the rhino, their funds are going to dry up, and they know it. You know, so they pretend to do a lot, but they don't actually do something that makes a difference. You know, so yeah.
I'm with you 100% on that, man. It's a very unique situation in which the species that you want to save, if you actually do your job and do it right, you're out of a job.
Exactly.
It should be the ultimate goal of anybody that's in the wildlife conservation space, right? You want to save something, save it. You should be out of a job. You've done your work.
Yeah.
Now move it into the sustainable use management arena, right? I like to say, and I'll let you close us out, but I like to say, and this is pure fact, rhino horn is the most expensive renewable resource in this world.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely
there is
right.
no other commodity that can regenerate itself. What do they regenerate, Vickers? 2 to 3 kilos every 18 months?
Well, depends on age, depends on sex, but on average, around, say, a kilo per year.
Kilo per year. So every 2 years, 2 kilos, right?
Yeah.
Times the multiplier that you just said, $25,000 a kilo. Name for me a renewable resource in this world that has the same price tag.
Yeah.
Like marijuana
now, just on that,
even like a marijuana poppies, they're not renewable, right? You're talking the drug trade, and it doesn't even get close. People say, well, diamonds are more expensive, Robbie. It's like, well, diamonds aren't renewable.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you know, there's obviously a lot of people that will say, yeah, you're just doing it for the money, you know. But if you look at the...
How much money are you spending a year, Vickers, on protecting your
Yeah,
rhinos?
well, basically, you know, just more than $2 million a year. But to get back to the court papers here, you know, the money that we get can only be used for conservation purposes.
See, I like that a lot. That is, again,
so it's not, you know, like I say, a free for all, and this is my ticket to riches or anything. You know, the money that the income that we get from rhino horn must go directly back into conservation. You know, so it's already ring fenced, and you know that's part of that exemption. It's a conservation breeding, and so the proceeds from that goes back into conservation. You know, so yeah, I just need to say that so that everybody knows. You know, this is not the silver bullet that's going to turn me into a rich man. You know, this is just going to help the rhinos.
I think that exemption or that added little bit of nuance to the court ruling is phenomenal, because you're absolutely right. One of the things that we are hammered on the most when it comes to our hunting industry is you guys make all the money. You guys are just getting rich. You're just getting rich. You're just getting, the profits. The community's not, not benefiting. Wildlife's not benefiting. The court rulings here say the money made by selling this horn must go back into the conservation of rhinos.
Mm. Yeah.
Vickers,
which I think is a very good thing.
Thank you so much, my friend. I really appreciate you. I appreciate our friendship. I appreciate you letting me have this conversation with you.
No, 100% you're welcome, and thank you for your support through the years. I'd like to see you soon in the States.
We'll come see Rockwood next year, okay?
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Cheers.